And welcome to my IVF Fences and European Fertility Society. We are very excited that we are back. We had a week's break, but we are back with some more events for you. And tonight we will discuss embryo donation, and we have a very special guest and expert who will help with your questions, of course, but also he will introduce you to our topic tonight. This is Vladimiro Silva. He's the IVF Lab Director, but also CEO of two clinics in Portugal, Procrear, as well as how do we call it? Ferticentro, sorry. Ferticentro, of course, at Coimbra. And if you have had a chance to already be on through one of the webinars, of course, I think that you had a chance to meet Dr. Vladimiro already. So I'm very happy that you are back. I know that all the sessions we are having with you are always interesting. So thank you so much for coming in here and for already being able to present this topic. How have you been? It's been a few months, I believe, that we've seen last of you, right? And how have you been? I know it's been busy as always.
Yeah. Hi, Caroline. So we've been crazy busy. Thanks for having me here. It's always a pleasure to participate in these events. It's been 2 years now, or 2 years and a half, that we've been doing this together. We've done multiple webinars here.
That's true.
And it's always a pleasure to be here. We are in summer. It's a very complicated season for us. We have a lot of work, and I was just telling you, we need to keep the same quality, and sometimes it's not easy to allow patients to work with the same quality. It takes time and patience. Well, these days everybody's in a hurry, chaos at the airports, all of what's happening in the world, but still life prevails. Okay, and so that's what we're here for.
Definitely.
I was saying tonight we're going to talk about embryo donation, which is a very interesting topic. Sometimes a lot of patients talk about double donation, believing that they are talking about embryo donation. So I've stick to the point, okay, to the topic, but I can also talk about double donation. It's a slightly different issue, but we will see. I will start my presentation.
Exactly.
And then everybody can ask. Okay.
Exactly. Go ahead, you can share your screen. I will let you know once we have it. And remember that afterwards you will be able to ask your questions. You can do it even during the presentation. And of course, Dr. Vladimiro will be able to help you out with the questions later on.
Okay. A lot of patients contact us asking questions about donor embryo conception, but they are really interested in double donation. It is a completely different thing, okay? In double donation, there is a sperm donor and an egg donor, and we create the embryos. While in embryo donation, these are embryos that were donated by other patients that were doing their own treatments, okay? So these embryos are not created specifically for this treatment. So the first thing, because our clinics are in Portugal, so I come from Portugal, and I have to talk a little bit about the Portuguese legislation, because the first question here is what you should know before you start and once you have a baby. Actually, the first thing you need to know is the legislation, okay? Because it is a very important issue. One of the most important things, and talking about the specific case in Portugal, is to find good quality care. Obviously, this is a kind of a baseline requirement. We can never waive that. But then we need to have it at affordable costs, and also we need to have a progressive IVF law, because this law will have a major impact in your life in the future. It will have a major impact in the life of your child, and it can make a lot of difference in the way that he sees the donation, how it was created, and so on. So what we have different here in Portugal is, first of all, the donation law. Our donors are non-anonymous, and so embryo donation is essentially done with non-anonymous embryos. I'm saying essentially because our law is in a period of transition. So until the 31st of July 2024, meaning in 2 years, we can still transfer donated embryos from anonymous donors. Those are embryos that were donated before the anonymity law changed. What does it mean to have non-anonymous donors? It means that it's a right of the children, not a right of the parents. And so at the age of 18, all children born from non-anonymous donations have the right of access to the identity of the donors. In the case of embryo donation, if the embryos come from a patient who did treatment, for example, with a couple, a man and a woman, the identity, we release the identity of both elements of the couple. If the embryos come from a donation, either a double donation or just sperm donation or just egg donation, we will disclose the identity of the patient and the donor. Okay, so patients, when they are donating embryos, they are accepting to disclose their identity to the people, to the children that will be born from that donation. They have to agree with that. They have to sign an informed consent form. They receive proper counseling about that. And so not only they are in peace with revealing their identity, but they did it in a conscious, deliberate way. Okay, because the problem with the anonymity of the donations is that nowadays there is no such thing as an anonymous donor. Because if you go to a DNA bank, you can order a DNA test at home for less than 50 euros. They will send you a swab and a home kit. You will send it via mail to one of these DNA banks, and then the answer that you will get is something like you are 50% European, 10% African, whatever, and then we have 23 half brothers and half sisters and 75 cousins registered in our database. Do you want to get in touch with them? And obviously, if you pay an extra money, you will be able to know the identity of those persons if they also agree to share their identities with unknown relatives. And so nowadays, with the current technologies, it's already very easy to discover the identity of an egg donor, a sperm donor, an embryo donor, and in 20 years from now, it would certainly be even easier, okay, because science is evolving at a very fast rate. So the difference is that if we have people donating that are willing to be non-anonymous, that agree with the non-anonymity, and that have received proper counseling about that, there won't be a rejection. Okay, you're not knocking at the door of someone who doesn't want to be found, who didn't know it was possible that he or she will be found, and so that can be very disturbing. For obviously, these persons are never the parents of the child, but the reason why children born from the donation many times want to have access to the identity of their donors is because they feel that their donors are a part of their genetic heritage of who they are. Okay, and it can be devastating if they get to meet that person, and at the end of the day, that person is something that moment where that happens doesn't go well, and people are not happy, and so the donors are surprised by the fact that they are found. So it is very, very important to do all sorts of donations with non-anonymous donors. Otherwise, you will be putting at risk you will be cutting off an essential right of your future child. Okay, another thing that is very important about the law is to have donations controlled by the state. For example, in Portugal, egg donors can donate up to 4 times in their lifetime. Sperm donors can donate for up to 8 families. So you don't want your child to get to the age of 18. Maybe he doesn't need to send his DNA to an international bank, but he can receive that information and see that he has 23 half brothers and sisters spread all over the world. And so obviously there is the risk of consanguinity, but it is also important for people, because when donations aren't open, it is a lot more difficult to control the identity of the donors, and in many countries there is no effective control over the number of donations. In Portugal, that is controlled by the state. An egg donor, for example, can't donate more than 4 times. A sperm donor can have kids in more than 8 families, and those values, those parameters are indeed controlled. This is not something that's in the law. It's something that when we before doing an egg donation cycle, we have to get a donation code from the Portuguese IVF authority, and if that donor has reached the limit, we don't get that code assigned, and so we cannot use that donor. It would be illegal. Okay, so it's a very controlled system that allows that keeps this from happening. This problem of having too many brothers and sisters all over the world. I'm sorry, because when we were exporting this presentation to Caroline's computer, it kind of changed the formatting. There are some errors, well, at least in my computer on this side. But then point number 3 is the transparency. Payments to donors are fixed by law and are the same in public and private centers in Portugal. In the case of embryo donation, there is no payment at all. Embryos are donated free of charge for those who donate them. In the case of egg donors receive 878 euros. In the case of sperm donation, every sperm donor receives 45 euros per donation. This is defined in the law. It's the same for all public and private centers. We can only pay by bank transfer or check. We cannot pay in cash. Donors have to sign a receipt, and we are inspected about that. And so it's a very transparent and strict process. We always need to pay that. We can't pay more. We can't pay less. Again, it's important to know that donors are not exploited, that donors they know from the beginning how much they will be getting, and the state defined the law this way exactly to keep a fair compensation for the problem for all the process of donation, but still it's not a value that allows someone to be a professional donor. Not only because they can only donate 4 times in their lifetime, separated by 3 months between donations, but also because that's not that much money. Another very important thing about the donation process is the safety, because when you are doing a treatment with any kind of donation, including embryo donation, obviously, you need to know that the access to the identity of the donor is something that is guaranteed by the state, and that information is kept for a very long time. For example, if your child at the age of 18 is not interested in getting to know the identity of his donors, he can change his mind at the age of 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever, and that information will always be there. It's the state, the Portuguese state, who has the responsibility to give access to that information. Also, on top of that, if there are some health issues and so on, that access to the identity of the donors can be granted earlier, and again, it is the type of control over the identity of the donors, over who are the donors, is a lot more strict in places, in countries where donors are non-anonymous than in the other countries. So this is, again, another important argument in favor of non-anonymous donors. So once again, the law, because, sorry, this is kind of important. In Portugal, all donated embryos come from other patients, so we cannot create embryo banking. There are countries where clinics are free to take the eggs of an egg donor, take the sperm of a sperm donor, create the embryos that belong to the clinics, and then they sell it to patients. In Portugal, we cannot do that. All of the embryos that are donated are surplus embryos that have been created during a treatment for a single woman or a couple, between a man and a woman, or a couple with 2 women. And so those embryos must stay frozen for at least 3 years before they can be donated. Okay, we can never donate the embryos before the 3-year period. After 3 years, patients have to decide whether they want to renew the cryopreservation, whether they want to donate the embryos to another patient, to destroy, or to give the embryos for scientific research. Another very important thing is that embryos are donated individually. So we're not donating sets of 5 embryos, 3 embryos, 2 embryos. No, every embryo is donated individually. So this means that, for example, nowadays we are in 2022. The most recent embryos that we have available for donation have been frozen in 2019. Okay, and since the anonymity law in Portugal changed in the middle of 2018, we are still in the early days of open embryo donation. Okay, so there are not this many donated embryos available, but still we are having a lot of we have, for example, at our clinics, we should have around 150 embryos available for donation, and this is what we have all the time. Another I will go through the advantages of doing treatment with embryo donation. The first one, I'm sorry if there are some formatting issues. Well, one of the advantages of this is that donated embryos, they all meet good standards of quality and prognosis, because while doing the patient's treatment, we only freeze morphologically viable embryos. We are very demanding when we are assessing the embryos. If the embryo is not good, if it doesn't have a very good quality, very good development parameters, we don't freeze them. So if an embryo has been frozen, that means that we believed in it, and so this is a very important question, and so all patients using donated embryos know that those embryos were found to be viable in the treatment that originated them. The other advantage is that these embryos are already formed. Okay, so there is no uncertainty associated, for example, with double donation. When we are fertilizing donor eggs with donor sperm, we have to check the embryos every day, see how many blastocysts we have. Obviously, it's a very good prognosis treatment, but still, we need to confirm that we're really going to get very nice embryos. The advantage of donor embryos is that we already know how the embryos are. Okay, they have already developed, they have already reached day 5 or day 3 sometimes, but mostly day 5. And so we know that for sure that those blastocysts have been formed. And so there is no uncertainty. We know that we have blastocysts or whatever embryos we might have. The other advantage is this. Those are embryos that wouldn't be used if it wasn't for you, the patients who are using it, because those are good prognosis embryos that were frozen, that were waiting to be adopted. If they are not adopted, they will be thrown away. I will give you a practical example. Like I said, we have 2 years to transfer anonymous embryos that we had before, that were created before 2018, and a lot of them, because patients typically don't want anonymous embryos, and so if we don't find patients to adopt them in the next 2 years, those embryos will have to be discarded and thrown away, and a lot of them are viable. So those are potential lives of children that will be wasted for this illegal reason. Okay, this is one of the, so there is kind of an ethical value in embryo donation, because we are giving these embryos an opportunity to implant and develop to a baby. Embryo donation is obviously the least expensive treatment of all, because the embryos are already formed, so we don't need to do another ICSI, we don't need to do another embryo culture, stimulate the donor, do the bloods on the donor, and so on. So the costs are way lower than a full double donation treatment, and they are immediately available. So it's kind of, sometimes patients say, I want to start treatment now, I need an embryo. Well, the embryo is already already here. Okay, so we don't need to wait for a donor selection process and so on, because sometimes that takes time. We need to match the donors, do additional testing and so on. In this case, the embryos are already there. Okay, obviously there are also downsides, which means that there is a limited availability of these donors, and we can predict it because we depend on the patients deciding to give the embryos to another patient. Okay, so we don't control whenever these embryos enter the system. Sometimes we spend like 2, 3, maybe 2, 3 weeks, maybe a month without having new embryos into the system. Then, on the same day we have 10 or 20 embryos getting in there, because this has to do essentially with bureaucracy, with people signing documents, with people answering the phone. Sometimes patients have divorced themselves from one another, and one of the persons wants to donate and the other don't. So there is a lot of fluctuations and factors that are totally independent of our will. So we always try to counsel the patients, to follow up, to closely monitor them, talk to them, explain how it works. But the fact is that ultimately this is always a decision from the patients, and so we cannot interfere with that. Another problem, and well, it's not a problem, it's a disadvantage, because sometimes patients get to the clinics and want to do treatment with donors with very specific physical traits, because everybody wants the donor to look as much as possible with he or she. I mean, it's normal. Okay, it's normal to want that if you are blonde with blue eyes, you want a blonde donor with blue eyes. If you are black, you want a black donor. A lot of patients, well, we do have patients who ask for different ethnicity donors, but and we obviously we have to follow the law, we have to comply with the legal requirements, but we always try to adapt. The thing about donated embryos is that we only have those. Okay, the embryos are there, they have those characteristics. The egg donor, maybe a Portuguese woman with brown eyes and white skin, and then the male partner could be the same. So it's kind of take it or leave it. Okay, there is no way of interfering with the physical characteristics, because the embryos are already created and we don't have any more. We just have those 100 or 150 embryos. And again, like I was saying, embryos are donated individually, and so it's unlikely to have the possibility of having multiple embryos from the same donors. So sometimes patients say, well, I want to have 3 or 4 kids, and so I want to do embryo donation with but I want 3 or 4 embryos from the same donors. That doesn't happen. Embryos are donated individually, and so if you want to do that, then maybe it's preferable to go to resource to double donation instead of embryo donation. With embryo donation, embryos are donated individually, and so that's how it works. And also another question about donated embryos, it's actually an important one, is that typically these are not first choice embryos. What does it mean? When a patient is doing her own treatment, sometimes we transfer the best embryo and we leave the other ones for later. The typical story of donated embryos is that someone tried to do the treatment, they got pregnant, they had 1 or 2 surplus embryos, and then they donate the embryos to someone else. But they've already transferred the best embryos from that group. Naturally, those are very good prognosis embryos because they belong to a group of embryos that already originated a pregnancy, but the reality is that we never know. So theoretically speaking, we are not talking about first choice embryos. We are talking about the second best, the third best, the fourth best. Okay, that happens a lot. Obviously, we do have lots and lots of babies born from donated embryos, and we even have babies born from donated embryos where in the initial cycle the patients didn't get pregnant and then divorced, donated the remaining embryos, and the patients who received the donated embryos did get pregnant and did have a baby. Okay, that happens a lot. The pregnancy rates of donated embryos are associated with the type of with the characteristics of the initial embryo. So they depend on the age of the woman. For example, if it was an egg donation, then it's a probability of pregnancy for an egg donation cycle. If it's a patient age 37, it's the probability of at 37. That information is always given beforehand. So when patients are doing embryo donation with us, we tell them, okay, this embryo comes from an egg donor that was 23 at the time of donation, and the sperm is from a male partner who was 42 at the time of donation, wherever. Okay, this is a random example. It can be from double donation. It can be for embryos that belong to a couple, just sperm donation. I mean, you name it. We have all the situations in our tanks. Okay, and obviously the probability of pregnancy is associated with the origin of the embryos. Naturally, a double donation treatment has the highest probability, while someone doing treatment with their own embryos at the age of 40 will have a very low prognosis, and in principle we don't even donate those embryos, but this is kind of a random example. So, like I was saying, embryo donation is the ideal solution if you, for example, if you wish to have a child without a male partner, or for women with a very low ovarian reserve. Okay, so and for women with a low ovarian reserve. So instead of doing double donation, embryo donation is it's a more straightforward, cheaper approach with a very good prognosis. Or sometimes for people that are in a couple but have problems from both sides. We have a lot of situations where there are male side problems alongside with female problems, and so instead of doing double donation, embryo donation is also a very cost-effective alternative. And again, sometimes patients, they don't afford double donation as much as they would like it, and so they just go for a cheaper and effective alternative solution. So there is a lot of indications, and fortunately, we don't have this many embryos available. Embryo donation is not the ideal solution. For example, when patients want to have more than one child from the same donors, it's very unlikely that we have more than one embryo available from the same origin. If patients want to be sure that donors share a very specific physical characteristic, it's a question of chance. We might or might not have that. We are transparent. We always give that information beforehand, and so if patients are happy with the proposition, we go through. If they are not happy, we don't go through. And also, for a lot of patients, they want to access more detailed information on the donor's background, and they ask for donor matching, for genetic matching between the sperm donor and the egg donor. Well, so unless we are lucky enough to have a double donation embryo where both donors had what we call an extended profile and have done the matching, which can happen. However, it's not very likely to happen. It's really a question of luck. That can happen or not, but if that's something important for the patients, then it's preferable to think about double donation, because then we can control all of those factors. So the bottom line here is that embryo donation is a very ethical approach. It's a cheap approach with very effective because the embryos that we freed, they have all been approved when they were evaluated for the treatment of the initial recipients, and so it's a very straightforward treatment and a very effective alternative for those who are in these circumstances. Well, thank you. It was really a pleasure to have you. Please, you can write me. This is my email. I don't know if you can see it. And we are very happy to welcome you at our clinics at Ferticentro and Procrear. And now I'm available for the Q&A. And please feel free to ask whatever question you might have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Indeed, it was worth the wait for sure. So thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. And Dr. Vladimiro, as always, it's been very interesting. Thank you for walking us through all aspects of embryo donation. And now it's time for your questions. There are some questions right here, of course. So I guess we can go ahead with the first one. Some of those are actually quite similar. So let me just show you. As you can imagine, we'd like to know more about pregnancy rate with embryo donation, and here success rate for older women. So if you can just have a look at this and tell us.
Okay, so I was kind of addressing that in my communication. So first of all, the age of the woman, of the recipient woman, is not that important because the uterus stays with the same capacity to receive and implant an embryo up to the age of 50. In Portugal, the age limit is 50 years old. So in principle, embryo donation, unless there are no other issues like that affect the integrity of the uterus, if there are no fibroids, no previous surgeries, sometimes patients, obviously older patients have higher risk of having multiple interventions for previous miscarriages and treatment failures in the past. So obviously there is the uterus can lose quality, but it's a very low decline. Okay, so in principle, pregnancy rates stay relatively stable up to the age of 50. Okay, so the age of for older women, there is not much of a difference when compared to younger women. Aside obviously from the obstetric factors like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and all of those age-related complications. So, and then the success rate, it depends on the origin of the embryos. Like I was saying, if we have the donated embryo from a double donation, it's 70%. Obviously, if we have a 25-year-old woman using her own eggs with a sperm donor, it's probably 60% or so, because statistically speaking, we know that donors have their fertility optimized. Naturally, if it is a 37-year-old woman with her own eggs and her husband, maybe we're just talking about 30 or 35%. The most important thing here is we have to be transparent. We talk to the patients, we explain the origin of the embryos, we share the information that the law allows us to share, we explain what are the chances, and then patients can take an informed, independent decision. So so it's hard to answer in a very straight way what is the success rate. I would say it's the same success rate as the embryo had before it was frozen and used and saved for the patients who owned it before donating it.
And thank you for your questions. And you already mentioned this, yes, because Michelle would like to ask about age limit. You already said 50.
50 years
exactly. Thank you. And are donated embryos genetically tested?
They can be or not. Okay. Again, there are rules on embryo testing. If the embryos have been tested before they were donated, then we share that information as well. We don't donate, for example, if that has been done, we only share euploid embryos. Obviously, if the embryo is not viable, it will not be donated. We can't even do that from a legal perspective. A different thing is, can we test the embryos before, embryos that were donated and not tested before being frozen? Can we test them before donating them? It will depend. Okay, we have to see, because, for example, in double donation cases, it makes no sense to donate, and the Portuguese law wouldn't allow it. But for example, if it is a patient with a past a previous history of IVF failure and so on, then we can test the embryos. So it's something that we need to evaluate on a case-to-case basis, on an individual basis. But I believe that, but so in some cases, yes, in some other cases, no. Okay, it's not a very direct answer.
That makes sense, of course, but thank you so much for your question and explanation here. There is a thank you from Michelle from the previous patient for you. Thanks a lot, guys. Okay, and if you can, you mentioned this as well, but what is the success rate with embryo donation for women who have gone through early menopause?
It's a little bit the same, because early menopause, I mean, with early menopause, the only solution to get a baby, to have a baby, is to use either embryo donation or egg donation. Okay, so this is something that we cannot avoid. Okay, it's inevitable, and then it really depends on the origin of the embryo. I would say that the early menopause, as long as the person in question responds to the estrogens that we need to give to build a lining, if we get a good lining, if we get an endometrium with good characteristics, then the prognosis is very good. It's like I would say it's the same for as the patients who donated the embryos had, or maybe even higher. Caroline, well, here you
I'm
are.
right here, of course. Sorry, I'm right here. Thank you so much. And there's a thank you from Laura for explanation here. Okay. Okay, how about this one? So is Portuguese law does Portuguese law allow single women to go through IVF program with donated embryos?
Yes, of course. We have a lot of our patients are single ladies who come to Portugal exactly because they want to do treatment with donated embryos, and especially with donors that can be contacted by the children once they get to the age of 18. Okay, it's like I was saying in my presentation, in Portugal we have one of the most progressive IVF laws in Europe, and obviously the single women can do IVF.
Brilliant. Thank you for confirmation. So it is possible, Sylvia. Thank you for your question. And Anna, I would like to know what are the chances to get pregnant at 42?
Well, it's a very difficult question because we need to evaluate, and 42 is actually a transition age. It's an age of transition. If Anna wants to get pregnant with her own eggs, we need to evaluate her ovarian reserve. And by ovarian reserve, I mean 3 different parameters: the antral follicle count, the FSH levels, and the AMH. And then we will have a notion on what are the chances. So typically, and giving the statistics for all women of all infertility causes, at the age of 42, chances will be in principle at around 12.5%. That's the average pregnancy rate with the women's own eggs at the age of 42. If we are working with donor eggs or donor embryos, it can be up to 70%, obviously, depending also on the male factor, on the characteristics of the uterus, but assuming that everything is fine at those levels, it can be as high as 70%.
Thank you so much. I hope that helped, Anna. Thank you indeed. And there is another interesting question here from Emma. When patients don't want their embryos, what percentage discharge them and donate?
Well, I actually don't have this number, but unfortunately, the percentage of embryos donating their surplus embryos is actually very low. It's disappointing. We respect and understand the reasons that patients sometimes have to not to share their embryos with other persons. So, but I mean, nowadays at our clinics we have around, like I said, 100 to 150 donated embryos that are available to be used. But the vast majority of the patients don't donate their surplus embryos. There is also maybe there is a tendency to change for that to change, but since in Portugal embryos can only be donated after 3 years of storage, it will take us some time to have that notion. And so, well, we really need to wait and see. We also have a lot of embryos that have been abandoned from people who are not reachable, that have changed their phone numbers, their email addresses, their sometimes even their home address. And if they have authorized us to donate the embryos, then it's fine. But many times that doesn't happen, and we need to contact them, and there is some bureaucratic issue to be taken care of. And so a lot of embryos are lost because patients, they just stop answering our contacts because for one reason or the other. Okay, so I don't have a percentage here. I can only say that it is too low.
Definitely understandable. Yes, this is definitely a difficult matter. So as you said, right, there are many different aspects of it. So thank you so much, Emma. Definitely interesting question. So I'm glad that we were able to talk about that part as well. Okay, let's have a look. We will be slowly finishing, but I believe there was one final question with some of the history here. I had multiple failures. My own egg donation, one failed with embryo donation. I have a fibroid, which I was told didn't disturb but still not pregnant. Why should I consider? What should I consider in moving forward?
Well, I mean, it's difficult without knowing all of the details because there are many factors that can interfere in the chances of an embryo to implant. There are immune factors, there are hematological factors, there are morphological issues in the uterus. There are also issues with the lining, with the window of implantation, with chronic infections, with the microbiome. So we also need to see what kind of quality, what was the embryo quality, the quality of the embryos that were transferred, if genetic testing was done or not, because having this story alone can be a completely different situation whether we have transferred perfect embryos to within the window of implantation with after a proper preparation, taking care of doing prophylactic protocols for the immune and hematological issues that are associated with implantation failures. And so that is one thing, and I would say it's a serious issue if you don't get a pregnancy with that, and if the lining is triple layer with at least 8 millimeters of thickness, and then that would be an issue. However, if one of these parameters wasn't met, maybe that explains the failure, and maybe we can correct it. So it's not easy to say. I would say there's probably we also don't know the age of Michelle, but typically speaking, unless in very serious situations, I would say in more than 95% of the cases, there is a solution. Okay. There are obviously cases where unfortunately medicine doesn't have a good solution, but luckily those cases are rare. So I would say that there's a good chance that there is hope for you, Michelle. We can obviously talk in private if you want to share your story with us.
Definitely, thank you so much. And as Dr. Vladimiro has mentioned, if you can reach out, and I'm sure they will be able to help you even more. And at Ferticentro, of course. Thank you so much. And in the meantime, we did receive 2 questions. So let's have a look at this. What about a woman age 50? What are the options, and how is it to get an egg donor from Africa? Hasn't been easy in the UK. Also, my uterus is to the right. Can that affect implantation?
The bad news, well, in Portugal, we do have a lot of African donors and African donated embryos donated from African patients. That is not a problem at all. However, our law doesn't allow us to treat patients after the age of 50. So unfortunately, we cannot help meshally. The fact that the uterus is to the right, in principle, this shouldn't be any issue. It's actually something that happens a lot, but obviously we would need to see it in order to give an opinion. But but the main issue here is the age and the law that doesn't allow us to treat patients after the age of 50. So in Europe, I would say maybe Cyprus would be the only country where that can be done. I don't know if in Greece they changed the law as well recently, I believe, but it is what it is. We have to live with the laws and work within the boundaries of the law.
That's understandable. Again, thank you so much for your question, Dr. Vladimiro. As always, it has been very useful, and I believe that was our final question. So thanks everyone for your patience for sure tonight and for your questions. I do believe it has been useful and interesting. Well, I can see that there are some comments already, of course, from Sylvia. Very interesting topic. That's true, and there are more thank yous for answering. And before we finish, there's someone is typing, so let's give it a minute. I want to make sure that we've answered all of your questions. But in the meantime, if there's anything else you would like to add.
Okay, well, no, I'd just like to wish everyone that was listening here good luck for their treatments. I believe most of these persons are undergoing IVF for some reason. I do hope this talk helped them. I'm available to talk, to discuss by email. Please feel free to contact me. And once again, good luck and take care. Okay, and
thank you,
Caroline, for having me here. It's always a pleasure to participate in your webinars.
We are always happy to have you back, and I'm sure we will have you back pretty much soon. So thanks everyone, and definitely informative in session. So thanks a lot. I'm glad that we are able to talk about all aspects, and this was definitely one of those webinars that I will remember. But thank you so much. Of course, it's been great to have you back. See you soon. And everyone, I know that, as you probably know, we will be back on Thursday. There's another event with Monica Vivas. I hope you will be able to join us. And of course, if you have any more questions, you can either contact me or Dr. Vladimir, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help you out with some more details. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Vladimir, till our next event. Thank you. Take care. Bye.